Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, really glad to have you with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. Jim Garrity is still away. He should be back tomorrow. In his place today, we're very happy to have Scott Bertram, the general manager of WRFH, Radio Free Hillsdale, 101.7 FM on the campus of Hillsdale College. Scott is also a lecturer in journalism at Hillsdale, directs Hillsdale's podcast network, hosts the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, and is also the co-host of the Political Beats podcast. And Wasn't That Special, 50 years of Saturday Night Live, which you can subscribe to and learn more about at wasn'tthatspecial.com. They're already to the mid-90s going through these 50 years of Saturday Night Live. So it goes quickly, and you don't want to miss any of that. So, Scott, today we've got our three martinis, and then it's not often that we have two Bears fans on this podcast, and so we're going to talk briefly at the end about...
Although really, being a Bears fan and a Jets fan, there's not a lot of separation there in the end.
I've mentioned this before, but Jim and I started the podcast in the fall of 2010. The Bears and the Jets made it to their respective conference championship games, lost them. The Jets have never been back to the playoffs. The Bears have never won another playoff game since then. So I don't think we're the curse, but we're not helping. Let's put it that way. So, all right, let's talk about our first martini. And it's I think it's a good martini that Joe Biden's pandering strategy to the pro-Hamas crowd on college campuses isn't working for the most part. Bloomberg News and Morning Consult have done monthly polls here in the various battleground states. They consider those to be Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. As of the last check-in on these polls, from March to April, Donald Trump is widening his lead just about everywhere, with the exception of Michigan, which is exactly where the Biden campaign is worried about losing Muslim votes because of their military support for Israel. The rhetorical support for Israel has pretty much evaporated, but not the material support. And certainly in the beginning of the response to the Hamas terrorist attacks, even the rhetorical support was there. But in Arizona, it's Trump +7. In Georgia, it's Trump +6, 49-43. Other than North Carolina and Nevada, he does not get to 50%. Michigan, Biden leads by 2, 47-45, but it's Trump by 8 in Nevada, 51-43, 10 in North Carolina, 51-41, by just 1 in Pennsylvania, but it was tied last month, 47-46 now, and it's now a 4-point edge in Wisconsin, where Biden had actually had a very small lead about a month ago. So, Scott, I don't know if we can attribute this entirely to Biden trying to thread the needle here. You know, we've still got the economy. We've still got the border. We've still got a lot of problems that people are fed up with Biden about. But if Biden's strategy was to make things better in Michigan, he seems to have slightly succeeded in that department while potentially alienating people he needs to vote for him in a lot of other states.
It's an open secret, of course, that so many recent maneuvers and rhetorical adjustments on behalf of the White House and President Biden are based on what's happening in Michigan and the fear that the Biden campaign will lose momentum and eventually lose Michigan, a key swing state, in November, what should be a key swing state in November. Now, the new poll from Bloomberg Morning Consult, I didn't see the crosstabs. I don't know if they polled a three-way race or a four-way race to see how RFK is affecting those numbers. But, and again, just a snapshot in time, but if you're going to look at these various states, all states, Trump up 6, and then the various swing states, I think you have to reach the conclusion that while his coddling of Hamas has resulted in a bit of an uptick in Michigan, where he now leads by 2, it's harmed him in all these other swing states, in many of them significantly. Nevada, Trump's lead was slim. Last check now is 8 points, as you said. So people are paying attention. Twitter is not real life. So the ability of a campaign to micro-target Michigan and say, we cannot lose Michigan no matter what, to the detriment of your success in other states, seems like a swing and a miss in the end.
Some of these states are notoriously mirages for the Republicans. Nevada, even though it is an 8-point spread, there always seems to be optimism about that, and then it tends to slip right through their fingers. Pennsylvania, a 1-point gap. So that's essentially a toss-up at this point. And I think the fact that they didn't necessarily put in the other candidates could affect this a little bit. But no, I mean, this is obviously a Republican opponent who's got some serious baggage. I mean, he can't really even campaign right now. He's mired in a court case in New York City. And then after hours, he's meeting people in the lobby of Trump Tower to try and maintain some sort of appearance of, meeting with world leaders and still looking forward to the campaign. Biden, on a whole variety of issues, has just looked weak. He looks weak in general, his age, his physical and mental ability. I think you're right. I think people don't like this equivocation, whether the material aid is still there or not. The fact that he's trying to pander to these voters by making Israel out to be the bad guy when it comes to how they're conducting their military operations could have more lasting negative consequences than just the folks he's trying to win over there in the Dearborn area.
And another red flag for the president in the polling from Bloomberg is the economy and the way that voters feel about the economy. Majority of swing state voters see a troubled economy ahead, and they blame Biden. And 75% said he was responsible for the current performance, and about half said very responsible, not just somewhat responsible. So how this economy moves in the next 6 months, 7 months or so, although with early voting, really like the next 3 months, I guess, before ballots are being cast in anger. But people feel the economy right here in Hillsdale this week. Gas prices Saturday were $3.59. They dropped slightly Tuesday to $3.39. This morning woke up, they're $3.89. So we're closing in on $4 a gallon gas again here in Michigan. I don't know what it's like in other places, but we're approaching the summer when gas prices usually increase. So it's not a stretch to say we could see $4 a gallon gas across much of the country for this summer once again. And again, interest rates, inflation, every time people go buy groceries, they see it. I saw it again Saturday. I've been tracking these prices for a long time. Going back before inflation even became a thing, I was taking pictures and monitoring. Generic Walmart chocolate chip cookie package is now, it's like $3.39. And 2 years ago, that was $1.88. And those prices move very quickly, and there's no downward pressure. So again, when President Biden says inflation's cooling and we've got inflation under control, people go and look and see the price tag at the store and say, okay, it's still 60% more than I was paying 2 years ago, or whatever it might be. Generic tortilla chips, 98 cents 2 years ago. Now they're $2.12 at Walmart. That's more than 100%. It increase. Right. I do some math on the show. And people see it. People see it. People feel it every time they go and check out. And what maybe you could go to the store a couple of years ago for $50 and get a nice variety of things. There's no way that's happening these days. You're spending closer to $100 to get that weekly trip. And that's a big deal for a lot of people. And no matter what the president wants to spin about how great the economy is or how much we're rebounding, inflation, don't worry about it anymore, people feel it all the time. And anyone trying to buy a house or a car, mortgage rates, interest rates are so much higher than they were a couple of years ago. It's a massive problem, which, again, a lot of talk this week, too. If the election is about Joe Biden's in big trouble. If the election's about Donald Trump, he might fare better. So where is the focus the next 6 months?
That's why he's going to focus 99% of his energy on democracy. And we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later in the podcast. And abortion. That's where he's going to spend almost all of his time, because you can't gaslight people on their daily reality. You can't tell them, oh, well, gas used to be up at $5, but now it's only pushing $4. Yeah, well, it was a little over $2 when you took office. So I'm not going to give you a pat on the back for that. And then all these other issues as well. I just want to say that Hillsdale College, of course, is well known for their online courses. Scott Bertram teaching people how to shop would be a phenomenal online course, because the amount of money you could save following his tactics is insane.
It's funny. My wife a couple of years ago asked me to do this for like neighbors who would ask her. And so somewhere in my bag, I did. I wrote this like one-page thing about how to shop for the best deals. And maybe I'll turn that into some sort of profit-making entity at some point. We'll see.
Exactly. and charge handsomely for it because the amount of money they're going to save at the store will easily pay for it in short order. So phenomenal stuff. But yeah, be a shrewd shopper. Scott is an expert at that. All right, let's talk about another shrewd move. If you are going to be consuming alcohol, maybe it's in response to the latest trip to the grocery store, or maybe it's just the state of this administration, take ZBiotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink first, and your next morning will be much, much better. This is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in your gut, and it's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. ZBiotics produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night. Then you do still need to drink pretty responsibly, and you'll feel your best in the morning. Good friend of mine knew his limits, but then as he got a little bit older, his next mornings got a little bit rougher, and so I gave him some of the ZBiotics. Much, much better. Go to zbiotics.com/3ml to get your 15% off your first order when you use 3ml at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with a 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Visit zbiotics.com/3ml and use the code 3ml at checkout for 15% off. Thank you, ZBiotics, for sponsoring this episode and our good times. All right, on to our second martini now, and I think this part of it is good. It's very complicated, especially on the right, about this national security legislation that went through. It was lopsided for the most part in the House and the Senate. Aid for Israel, aid for Taiwan, those were less controversial. The aid for Ukraine is the biggest price tag and probably the most controversial foreign aid provision in this legislation on the right side of the aisle. But the other thing we're mainly going to talk about here from this legislation is the TikTok component, which will force ByteDance, the owner of TikTok, to sell it, to find a new owner, because there can no longer be any sort of Chinese ownership of TikTok. And that's because TikTok is Chinese Communist Party spyware. And the idea that we don't want Chinese Communist Party spyware in the United States and poisoning the minds of our kids in a number of different ways that is bad, from self-harm to pushing the Palestinian propaganda to the trans agenda and all this other stuff and much, much more, turning them into to zombies as they stare at their phones all day. My only concern here is just making sure that this doesn't end up stifling online speech in unintended ways. But Scott, in terms of protecting our kids and protecting our privacy and the Chinese mining our data, hopefully this ends up being as good as we hope it is.
I don't use TikTok, and no one in my family uses TikTok, and I tell students not to use TikTok. They don't always listen to me. It's a national security concern and a personal privacy concern. And, some of the opponents to the ban are just not seeing it or speaking about it. There was a quote in this story from the AP from Ro Khanna, California. I think it's not going to be well received. It's a sign of the Beltway being out of touch with where voters are. But that's completely beside the point. A majority of people aren't pushing for a ban because they don't like that people use a particular app. The ban is being proposed and will become law after the president signs because, as you mentioned, it is a Chinese communist spy operation that is hoovering up all sorts of personal data that can be used against us in the future. And that's national security. There's a reason why people in the White House can't use it. There's a reason why I know here in Michigan, I'm almost certain Michigan state government also has a ban on TikTok on government issued. There are reasons for all of that. We should all be very concerned about that. So this angle about we just don't like young people using it, that might be true, but it's not the reason for this ban. It's not a ban either, a forced sale being a part of this legislation. However, if there are secondary benefits to it, no one's going to sort of cry about it. I don't think. Just before we started, I saw a new study from Norway, where all the best studies come from. I don't know if you're aware of this. Norway has the best studies. Smartphone bans student outcomes and mental health, by Sarah Abramson from the Norwegian Institute of Public Health. So they did a huge study on what happened when they banned smartphones from schools. And what the study shows, banning smartphones significantly decreases the healthcare take-up for psychological symptoms and diseases among girls. Post-ban bullying among both genders decreases. Girls' GPA improves. Effects are larger for girls from low socioeconomic backgrounds, so poorer people. Hence, banning smartphones from schools could be a low-cost policy tool to improve student outcomes. As Norm Macdonald would say, this comes from the pages of the New Scientific Journal. Duh. Who didn't think that you would see these things happen if smartphones were removed from school classrooms?
I'm sure they'll find something else to obsess over in terms of an app. And so we won't solve the entire problem by getting rid of TikTok. But in terms of some of the most insidious content, and certainly, and most significantly to this legislation, you've got the national security concerns, like you said, and of course with the harvesting of all that information. It's spyware. It is spyware, and the fact that this is being dealt with.
Spyware. Spyware
Exactly.
designed to make you use it more often and for longer stretches, and so it's perfectly designed to accomplish its mission.
Exactly. And Andy McCarthy, who also sometimes subs for Jim, says, if you're going to go after anyone else as a result of this legislation, you're going to have to get the authorization of a court to do it. I know some people are worried that because, it's about the amount of foreign ownership or foreign investment that is sometimes the trigger for this. And so if there's any sort of loophole in here where the Biden administration could go after X and Elon Musk or any other social media site that they don't like, I assume they would take that. So that's my main concern. I don't want this to end up throttling free speech online just because it's effective against this particular one. So hopefully this was drafted correctly. And if it wasn't, hopefully it's remedied in court quickly. All right, let's talk about another great sponsor, and that is 4Patriots. 4Patriots.com/Martini is where you want to go. The great deal right now, the deluxe 3-month survival food kits back in stock after being sold out for more than a year. Fantastic recipes on things like pancakes, mac and cheese, potato soup, Aztec chili, spaghetti, and lasagna. More than 200,000 smart Americans agree this is survival food that tastes good, and you just don't know what's coming. We just talked last week about how the Chinese Communist Party, speaking of them, are actively trying to hack our critical infrastructure. And so you just don't know when you're going to need to be able to make some meals in a slightly different way than you're used to. These come with disaster-resistant packaging, 100% satisfaction guaranteed. You can stash food away and be confident that when a disaster strikes, you and your family will be ready. Go to 4Patriots.com/Martini to get the deluxe 3-month survival food kit and the peace of mind you deserve. Plus, get free shipping on orders over $97. That's the number 4Patriots.com/Martini. That's 4Patriots.com/Martini. All right, Scott, we promised democracy talk, and we shall have democracy talk. And
wait, can we vote on that first?
Yes, I vote aye. And I don't know, I guess Ty goes to still talking about it. So let's talk about how the Democrats, and Jim and I have mentioned this before, that, if you're against now anything that the Democrats want to do, you're against democracy. You're trying to smother and stifle democracy. It's like a couple of years ago, and I'm sure this is still kind of their talking point, that if you're against whatever they want to do, well, obviously you're racist. Or even better, my favorite is when if you pass the Republican tax cuts or end net neutrality or pass whatever other legislation they want, people will die. People in huge numbers will die because you changed internet policy. But anyway, Stacey Abrams, who is also a big proponent of pandering here, speaking on MSNBC, saying now that opposition to the DEI agenda, diversity, equity, inclusion, which is kind of the new word, a new acronym for CRT, critical race theory, saying that if you're opposed to that kind of thing, you hate democracy.
What we know is that the attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, is an attack on democracy, it's an attack on education, it's an attack on how our economy works, because what Reverend Warnock and John Ossoff, what Senator Ossoff and Senator Warnock represent, are pathways to the American dream. They are proof points. And those proof points scare those who want this world to be more narrow and more restrictive. And so we have to recognize that our opportunity to hold to those successes requires our constant attention, our constant tending.
Georgia voters, thank you so much for never making her governor. The idea that opposing DEI attacks education, when I would argue that DEI clearly attacks education by, rooting out merit and basing everything on race and gender and ethnicity and all sorts of other things. And the consequences of that are certainly very, very negative. What do you make of her basically trying to throw, hey, if you hate anything on our agenda, you hate democracy?
Not just democracy, but also education and our entire economy. So be careful. Your words could collapse our economy if you criticize DEI policies. It's interesting as these protests are happening at some college campuses across the country, especially at some of our most esteemed institutions. Some of those same institutions are reversing policy and going back to requiring standardized test scores, which were done away with some years ago in the name of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they figured out they're not getting the best of the brightest. They're not getting students who can thrive at those institutions, and now reversing those policies. Also interesting, deeper into that quote, which struck me, and I had to look it up. I need your help, Greg, because I might be missing something. So she says that what Senator Warnock and Senator Ossoff represent our pathways to the American dream and paraphrasing, but all represent like DEI in some way, like they represent what we're all about here. How does Senator Ossoff represent any of that? He's a white dude, right? And I went and looked at his resume, not his resume, but his background. His mom,
I did too,
an Australian immigrant who co-founded New Power PAC, an organization working to elect women to local office in Georgia. His dad, an attorney who owns Stratford Publications. He was an intern in high school for John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis, graduated Georgetown, has a Master of Science from London School of Economics in 2013. He seems like a guy who has benefited from a whole lot of privilege throughout his life, is what I would say. I'm not Stacey Abrams here, but when I look at his background, I wouldn't say he's any sort of celebration of DEI or the various pathways to the American dream. He looks like a guy who Stacey Abrams would be pillorying, if not for the D right after his name.
Yes, he votes the right way, and so that's what's important. Now, I don't know if it's because he's Jewish that she
that was
thinks
the one, right? That's the one intersectionality moment there. What intersectionality?
That's all he's got, though.
Detail,
yeah, his family's filthy rich. You mentioned Georgetown, London School of Economics. He went to high school. I never know how to pronounce this word. It's either Paideia or Paideia Independent School. Now, he graduated in the mid-2000s, 2005-ish. He was born in 87, so I assume that's about the time he graduated. Now, to send your kid to high school there, it's $31,500 a year. I'm sure it was cheaper then, as we talked about inflation, but it probably wasn't cheap at the time. So the idea that John Ossoff has somehow benefited from DEI, no. But that's never let Stacey Abrams get in the way of a good story, especially on MSNBC, which, of course, will never, ever fact check her.
It's also incredible, and this is not a unique point to make, but I'll make it again. Frequently losing Democrats, somehow still looked at as political sages. Like, what does Beto O'Rourke think about X? Well, let's talk to Stacey Abrams about Y. She keeps losing. And whatever goes to failed Republican senatorial candidates. No one talks to Christine O'Donnell about her opinions on anything at all, except maybe witchcraft. Carrie Lake is not brought on as some sort of expert after losing a gubernatorial race in Arizona. It only happens with these scions of the left to lose election after election, but are still brought on as, well, you almost did it. You lost by 13. What can you tell us?
Not only did she lose, she denied that she lost, which makes her an enemy of democracy, Scott. So now she's trying to, of course, pivot back the other way. That's the great defender of democracy. And Scott, as we teased at the top, real quickly, tomorrow for the second year in a row, the Chicago Bears have the number one draft pick. Last year, they traded it away to the Carolina Panthers and got a truckload of draft picks, which turns out to be a pretty good trade. This year, they got it again because the Panthers were horrible again, and they also have their own pick at number 9. This year, they're keeping it. It looks pretty obvious that it's going to be Caleb Williams, the 2022 Heisman Trophy winner out of Southern Cal. My persistently negative view of the Bears is that they can't develop quarterbacks well. I know you were happy that Justin Fields is no longer on the Bears. I just now wait to see how the Bears will mess this up because, as I like to point out, other than Jim McMahon, as a first-round draft pick in 1982. The Bears have not drafted a championship-winning quarterback in the first round since they drafted Sid Luckman out of the Ivy League in 1938.
Well, Greg, that's not quite true, depending on your definition of championship, because a guy by the name of Jim Harbaugh was a first-round draft pick of the Chicago Bears, and he, my friend, is a champion.
Zero playoff wins in Chicago.
College football playoff championship coach, drafted first round by the Bears in 1987, I believe. Yes, of course the Bears always find a way to screw things up, but I'm cautiously optimistic because I don't know that any rookie quarterback or young quarterback coming into the Bears organization has ever had a better setup to succeed. Now, Matt Eberflus is a defensive-minded head coach, so you look at the offensive guys. They brought in Shane Waldron from Seattle, who people seem to have a high opinion of, but the talent around Caleb Williams is going to be immense after bringing in Keenan Allen from San Diego, Los Angeles, and also already having DJ Moore from the trade last year. They could draft a receiver at number 9, perhaps, and add another weapon at receiver. Cole Kmet as starting tight end. That's a better offensive line than people think because Justin Fields was so bad last year in terms of holding onto the ball and not finding his receiver. A lot of times it was not an offensive line deficiency, but a quarterback deficiency that led to sacks. That line's in better shape than it was. They bring in the free agent back from Philadelphia, DeAndre Swift, this offseason. It's a deep running back room. There's a lot of talent around Caleb Williams, and he's going to need coaching, and he's going to need help off the field. But on the field, he's in a fantastic situation to succeed. And it's a pretty good defense, too, especially back half of last year. And a quarterback's best friend can be an outstanding defense.
That's been true of every Bears quarterback, certainly in my lifetime, the ones that have succeeded well. McMahon was good, but let's be honest about why they were world champions in 1985. And obviously, getting to the Super Bowl with Rex Grossman as your quarterback was largely due to the work of the defense. So I would love to be proven wrong, Scott. Let's celebrate the opportunity while we have it tomorrow night and see how things turn out in the fall. Anyway, Scott, always great to have you. Thanks for pinch hitting several times the last week or so, and we look forward to doing it again down the road. See you then.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate it.
Scott Bertram is the general manager of WRFH, Radio Free Hillsdale, on the campus of Hillsdale College, 101.7 FM. He's also a lecturer in journalism there. He directs the Hillsdale College Podcast Network, hosts the Radio Free Hillsdale Hour, and is co-host of both the Political Beats podcast and Wasn't That Special? 50 Years of Saturday Night Live. You can find that at wasn'tthatspecial.com. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. As I mentioned, Jim Garrity should be back on Thursday. Join us then. In the meantime, please subscribe to the podcast if you don't already. Give us 5-star ratings. We would love that as well. And a kind review. They really do help the podcast. Get us on your home devices. You can listen by just saying play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow all of us on X. He's at Scott Bertram. Jim is at Jim Garrity, and I'm at Dateline_DC. Have a terrific Wednesday, and join us again on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.